What is up, Steeler Nation? Jay York Football with Mic'd Up Sports One back for another great episode of the Sick Podcast, Steeler Crazy. We have a very special guest today. How's everything in South Florida, Michael?
Everything is good. Rainy summer per usual. We just had the Florida Panthers parade this past weekend. It thunder, lightning down here, left and right, and all the crazy Floridians still were at the parade with their shirts off, running around. They haven't had a Florida Panthers parade, obviously, so they showed out. Big props to them. I did not go. Obviously, I have to maintain the integrity to our Pittsburgh Penguins. However, I thought about it. I've never been to a sports parade. You didn't. We were too young. We were in high school, and I was in college for the Steelers and the.
I've never been.
Me either.
In the
Three Penguins.
No, did I go to the Penguin? No, I didn't. I went to a Game 7 Penguin in Washington, but I never have been to a parade. So hopefully the Steelers can do that soon.
Took the words out of my mouth.
There you go. All right. Well, we have a great guest, as we said, always breaking down the best in NFL and Steelers football. So, Jimmy, let's take it to the end zone.
Turn up your volume. Because you're about to listen to The Sick Podcast. Steelers Crazy.
Harris Smith shields. Flacco Polamalu takes it home. Super Bowl 43. Pittsburgh might be bound for that thanks to number 43.
The sickest Pittsburgh Steelers podcast. Sports entertainment like no other. It's gonna be sick.
Yeah, let's rock and roll. So we're excited to welcome in a guest today. As you mentioned, we love having on some neutral observers, I suppose. So this guy, he's in Minnesota right now. We're talking to him off air a little bit, but he's ready to talk a little bit Steelers football. You can find him on Twitter or X, whatever you want to call it these days, at Arif Hasan NFL, wideleft.football.com. It's our guy, Arif Hasan. What's going on, man?
Hey, what's going on?
Have you ever been to a championship parade?
No, I live in Minnesota.
I guess I'm trying to think what's the closest you guys have had in a long time? I guess the NFC Championship, Brett Favre days? Is that the closest?
Yeah. Technically, the Twins won in '91, but I wasn't actually even living in Minnesota at the time. But I was also only 3, so wouldn't have. But the Minnesota Lynx have won a number of championships. The parades are not as large as they would be for like a major 4 sport, so it's not really the same experience. But yeah, Case Keenum NFC Championship game, they lost 38-7 to the Eagles right before they could have hosted a home Super Bowl, and then before that 2009, and then before that 98. So, but yeah, the closest right now are the Timberwolves, which is an insane thing to say. I'm not used to that.
That city is a buzz for the T-Wolves, and well-deserved. That's a sick young team. And the Keenum play to Stephon Diggs in New Orleans, of course. How did I forget the game before? One of the best all time. All right, speaking of parades, we got some Steelers fans who are parading down the streets because of the upgraded quarterback, and some skeptical, of course. I just want to jump right into it. Russell Wilson, Justin Fields, who's going to start, and do you have any optimism about either of these guys?
I think it's probably going to be Russell Wilson. I think the fact that he just makes decisions quicker than Justin Fields is going to be kind of the key operating factor. That's one thing that tends to stand out in a training camp environment. And Russell Wilson is not the fastest decision maker among starting quarterbacks, but Fields is pretty remarkably slow when it comes to anticipating where the ball needs to go. Generally, actually, I do think that Fields makes good decisions. It's just either he doesn't trust his eyes enough and hasn't for the last couple of years, or doesn't see the decisions develop quickly enough in order to act upon them. Either or, I feel like that decision-making velocity is going to be the key there. I'm not remarkably optimistic, but I do think that you're right to characterize this as an upgrade at quarterback. So I don't think Russell Wilson has the juice anymore, but I do think that he's better than Kenny Pickett. One thing that I've kind of found super interesting, and I think that one thing that I've generally noticed among the way that people covering the Steelers talk about Mike Tomlin and the way that people outside of kind of Steelers coverage talk about Mike Tomlin is very different. There's a lot of people within Steelers coverage that seem to be kind of sick of him, kind of want to move on and stuff like that. And people on the outside are like, oh my God, this dude, how did he craft a 500 plus season again? And I think there's probably like a bit of I think fairness to both perspectives, especially as people who cover the Steelers have a lot more insight into that kind of thing. But I do think that seeing a 500 season from a Kenny Pickett-led team should tell us that there are possibilities in the future for a Russell Wilson-led team, especially as Calvin Austin gets better, as you've got Roman Wilson in there. Just generally, it's a little bit of a better offensive environment. Hopefully there's 2 draft picks on the offensive line. Hopefully, we get some immediate returns out of that too, because that was a pretty big problem for a little bit. So, I do think that there's a gain to be had here. I just don't know if it's going to mean anything, come playoff time, especially in the AFC, where it's a lot more difficult to do something once you get into the playoffs.
Yeah, no question. And for anybody watching out there who didn't already capture the fact that Arif is a big Minnesota guy, obviously saw a lot of Justin Fields. So that is, coming from somebody, of course, who's probably watched more Fields than a lot of people in Western Pennsylvania, that's for sure. I mean, I'll quickly give you the Tomlin, scoop in the 412, because I know we were going to talk about that, Jordan, but you kind of already touched on it. We are on your team with this, by the way. Big Tomlin supporters, big fans. We also can understand the perspective of the fact that he hasn't won a playoff game, and we're talking 7-8 years now, right? So 9-8 gets old after a while. Standard here is winning playoff games. So that's where that comes in. And obviously the Cleveland Browns won a playoff game more recent than the Pittsburgh Steelers. So that hurts our souls a little bit.
Yeah,
it hurts.
Why'd you have to remind him?
I'm sorry. I had to give the breakdown. So if somebody asks him on the next show why Pittsburghers are angry about Tomlin,
there you go.
You'll hit him with
that's a perfect soundbite for that. Yeah, I love it.
Boom. I want to talk to you about Steelers and wide receivers. I did a little bit of homework, of course, and I saw that you mentioned about the Steelers drafting wide receivers and maybe that being a little bit overblown. Is it like me when I used to be single and go to the bar and I was like, if I hit on 30 girls, maybe one will say yes? Is that an analogy that makes some sense?
Oh, yeah. No, I mean, presumably one of them did say yes. But yeah, no, that's
great.
There you go.
Wasn't at a bar. That's why, because it wasn't
right. There you go. But yeah, I mean, the Steelers have drafted like a second or third round wide receiver like almost every single year since like Limas Swede, right? Like it's been pretty consistent, and some of those guys have hit pretty big. Some of them haven't, right? And I think that we tend to focus on the ones that stand out that have hit a lot and don't tend to stand out as much or have moved on or even like kind of make excuses. Like I think there was like a pair of like Sammy Coates, for example. I was thinking of like some Clemson receivers, but like when you see that happen, like I've like called out some of these guys by name and somebody was like, well, I mean, Coates still altered coverage when he was on the field. And it's like, first of all, no, he didn't. But second, yeah, it's still like a failure of a draft pick. Like there could be a lot of reasons for it, but I think we tend to overfocus on it. Is their hit rate still higher than their contemporaries? Yeah, but you'd kind of, I think, expect that that some teams would have a higher hit rate than others, even if there was no difference. And the Steelers do have a good front office and a good coaching staff, so you're going to increase the hit rate a little bit. But I do think that people over-focus on it. And that's the reason the Steelers have been kind of cycling through receivers a little bit here. Just not to say that Juju Smith-Schuster was like a bust of a pick or anything like that. That one's actually kind of a difficult one to adjudicate. But I think the fact that we keep on talking about the potential of Steelers receivers as opposed to the talent of Steelers receivers, I think speaks to the point that they have not been as consistent as people have talked about.
It's easy to have really good receivers when you have a Hall of Fame quarterback as well. I always want to throw that out there. Sometimes you learn a little bit more about the receivers when the Hall of Fame quarterback is gone. This guy has a lot of talent. We know that for sure. Brandon Aiyuk, what's going on there? Does he get moved?
Man, I mean, it's interesting because he himself said he thinks that the first place he's going to land is the 49ers, right? He thinks he's not likely to get moved. And if he does get moved, it'll be to Washington to play with Jaden Daniels. And I think he said his third choice was the Steelers, right? Which I think would be very exciting for Steelers fans. I think that probably he doesn't get moved, and I think that the reason for that is just, teams have a lot of power. Players don't have a ton of power in this type of scenario. And so he doesn't get a ton of choice here. What I find kind of interesting about all of this, of course, and I'm sure that his team has noticed this, is that the 49ers are holding on to him because in the trade market, they estimate his value to be like a first-round pick. But in the contract market, they estimate his value to be apparently significantly lower. I guess I don't know what the actual numbers they offered him are. And that's got to be frustrating for Aiyuk, and it's got to be the basis of kind of that trade demand, as well as kind of his usage. He doesn't want to be used as a running back as much as he is. But I think that the team can do that because they have a lot of control over the situation. There's not a ton of examples where, obviously we know about the Le'Veon Bell example where a player basically sits out a year in order to exercise some leverage. That didn't work out for him. That's a little bit unique to the running back market, but I do think that crosses over into the receiver market a little bit. We've seen receivers take a year or two off. Calvin Ridley is the most recent example. Yeah. But even, what was it, Josh Gordon took a couple of years off and he tried to come back and he was still physically quite fit, but it's difficult to maintain your level of football shape without actually being in a football environment. And I think that he might know that. And so I think San Francisco, who are a skill player-driven team more than most really good teams, are going to try to hold on to him for as long as they can to extend that window that they have, because they're really close, right? They're so close to winning it. And I don't think they want to, drop off assets before that happens.
Makes a lot of sense. Before I kick it over to Jordan, one last question here. If the Steelers do not trade for a guy like Aiyuk, I think, we can all acknowledge that the receiver room is quite bare. However, we're very high on George Pickens. In your estimation, from kind of an outside view, can he be elite?
I think he can be, but I think the odds of that are probably more pessimistic from my end than on your end. I don't see it happening. Obviously, the total talent level is there, and of course, you have to note that he put in a lot more effort in all of the, I don't know about details or smaller stuff, but the off-ball stuff after Tomlin called him out directly in a presser. And I don't know if that's because of a call out in a presser or behind-the-room conversation, or it just happened to be, but he became a lot more, I think, active. But I think that kind of player whose attitudinal issues extended all the way past into Georgia, when he was at Georgia, and even high school, these are issues that have dogged him. I don't know that these kind of changes shift. And I've seen players shift attitudes permanently a fair amount. It just doesn't happen a ton, right? Or, with some players like Percy Harvin, it happens after they retire, which is not a great help to like the Seattle Seahawks, right? Yeah. So I don't know that he'll focus on the details he needs to focus on in order to be elite. My concern is also it's very rare for a jump ball receiver who doesn't get a ton of separation relative to his peers to consistently produce. It's not impossible. We saw Brandon Marshall do it. We saw DeAndre Hopkins do it. Certainly possible, right? But it's pretty rare compared to separators. And that's usually where your money is made, especially in a quarterback situation that's not ideal. I think when you have a jump ball quarterback, you probably want a better quarterback. Because ball placement just matters, I think, a lot more in contested situations than when a receiver has separation. It's a lot friendlier to a quarterback. So I think that that's also part of it too, and that obviously has nothing to do with George Pickens' skill level individually, but it has a lot to do with how we perceive or how we grade him against his peers. Because if he's losing, a couple hundred yards every year because of a ball placement, then he's not getting the 1,400 yards he needs to be considered up there with like your Jamar Chases and your Justin Jeffersons and so on. But even then, that lack of separation does concern me. The inconsistency of contested catch production in general kind of concerns me. Here's an interesting fact. So Justin Jefferson's really well known for his contested catches, and fair enough, he should be. Before that incredible catch against Buffalo, he had one of the lowest contested catch win rates in the NFL going back 2-3 years. After that, he had one of the best. So either this is just variance and this is what happens, or it unlocked something, or something in between. I don't know, but it is a very high variance thing. Very few receivers have high contested catch win rates over multiple seasons, and I've had the opportunity to cover a couple of them. Stephon Diggs, Adam Thielen are two examples of it. Tyreek Hill is interestingly another example of it, but he also has kind of the worst hands in the open field of any elite receiver I've ever seen. It's kind of an interesting situation. But yeah, it's a pretty rare thing to be consistently good at, so it's hard to make that your calling card.
Fair enough. So we kind of talked about, the playoff wins, and we had to watch this Matt Canada offense. Well, Arthur Smith comes in from Atlanta. Talk about what you think he can bring to this Steelers team, and do you think it's going to be that big of a change? Obviously it is, but I'm talking, amounting the wins.
Yeah. This might be one of the bigger upgrades I've seen at offensive coordinator. Obviously, I don't think of Arthur Smith as a top 5 play caller offensive coordinator. I do think he's very talented. I think that he's maybe outside of that, like 8 or 10 or whatever, right? I think he's up there. I think he's very good at play design. I think he's pretty good at play calling, but at play design, he's remarkable. And then, of course, part of that equation is that Matt Canada was awful. And so that's how you get that upgrade. But, it's not going to be the same, I don't think. Anything can happen. It's the offseason. I don't know everything or really anything. But it's not going to be the same probably as Mike McDaniel going to, Miami, right?
Yeah.
Like that was extraordinary in terms of offensive production output. But what I saw of Arthur Smith in terms of the way that the plays were designed in Atlanta and then also going back to Tennessee, it's really good stuff. I don't think he's a very good head coach, but in terms of offensive play design, he does a really great job of, understanding what weapons he has and how to use them. I think that he does a great job of creating a very variable running game. In particular, obviously they leaned on the running game a lot, but a very variable running game that attacks in multiple ways, not just with, the attack points of the running backs, or the quarterback in the case of the Atlanta offense, but also in terms of the way that the blockers are tasked with blocking. It's probably a difficult offense for offensive linemen to learn because of all of the different things that they're tasked with learning from a run blocking perspective, but it is very effective at doing what it wants to get done. If, Mike Tomlin can make sure that the run-pass balance is healthy, right? It's well situated for the situation that they're in, then I think that you're probably going to get a lot more out of the running game than you've gotten out of the past 2 years, which was static and dead. And I think some of that was blocking, and I think some of that was Najee Harris, but I think a lot of it was also play design. I mean, a lot of it was blocking, but a lot of it was play design. And I think that this is gonna help with that. Now, whether or not he's good at play sequencing and setting up plays, I've noticed that he probably is, but I don't think it's as good as the individual play design. And so maybe that's something that a healthier coaching environment can produce, like self-scouting can produce. But I really, really like him. He's really smart when it comes to play design.
I know our viewers will be happy to hear from that, because the thing is there's so many perspectives, the local and national perspective, and we try and be unbiased on the podcast, so it's always good to get another person, a Minnesotian, I guess I can say, perspective. So a few more questions before we get you out of here. Do you think that Cam Hayward deserves at this point in his career to be paid like he's asking?
Man, I think ethically, yes. I think that from the perspective of, being a cutthroat NFL organization, probably not, right? That's the reality of it. And this is my biggest, I guess, not issue, but concern about running backs, is that you don't get to pay them for what they've done. You pay them for what you expect them to do, which is why their market is always suppressed. Now, if you paid Hayward for everything that he's done, or just his performance above the level of contracts that he's had historically, he'd get a fat contract. But I don't know that that's going to be something he can negotiate in an open market, because teams are going to pay him based off of his expected value. Now, there's something to be said about front offices that strategically overpay keystone players in order to maintain relationships and maintain a good locker room and stuff like that. Organizations will do that. NFL teams will do that. But it doesn't happen a lot. And those players often take pay cuts a year or two down the road. It doesn't last very long. And so Hayward's been one of the most underrated interior defenders for a decade. So it's tough for me to say no, but I think from the perspective of market realities, he probably, quote unquote, shouldn't get that contract. I think the Steelers
agree.
Owe him, but it's different. Yeah.
Yeah, and I totally get that. He actually tweeted back at me. I made a tweet probably like 6 months ago or 5 months ago, whenever this, and I just said that
you were one of the first to be a anti-Hayward in this movement.
Yeah.
And Cam was not happy with Jordan.
I mean, I love him. Like I said, I literally think it was a tweet where it said we could change the Steelers logo to Cam Hayward's face, but what he's asking for is blasphemy. And I still stand by it. We love Cam. He does so much for the community, but I just think that you could use that money to, build a Super Bowl contending team. And that's what we want here. And that's all it was. It's not personal. Sometimes you got to look at the business side of things, because at the end of the day, it is a business. But yeah, it's still funny. I love Cam. I mean, I wouldn't be mad if they paid him. I just don't think it would be in the best interest of the team to do so. So yeah, I have one more question, and then I would love to tell our viewers and everything that you have coming up and where they can find your work. But where do you think that the Steelers are in the pecking order in the AFC North, realistically? I know it's way too early, but
yeah,
football's going to be here in like 36 days.
Until they prove it, they're third, right? Like until they bring it together and rack up, more than just another 500 season. You're behind Baltimore, you're behind Cincinnati. And picking between the two of them, that one's tough. I'll probably pick Cincinnati, but still, that's tough.
So you're still saying the Browns are the Browns?
I mean, they're the Browns. What am I supposed to say?
Thank you. See, this is when we have national guys on like yourself, we always like to get, because I just feel like you're coming from a place where you're just telling it like it is. And that's what we like to do here on the Sick Podcast, Steeler Crazy. So go ahead, continue.
Yeah, I mean, well, okay, so here's the thing. I like Stefanski a lot. He's a former, actually, Minnesota Vikings guy. There's a rumor that he was going to take over as head coach after Mike Zimmer was gone, but the Browns came calling a little bit earlier in that cycle, and, more power to him. Like, I'm glad. But Deshaun Watson isn't good. Like, I don't know how else to get around that. Like, they don't need to hold. I mean, they financially do, but like I think emotionally they don't need to hold on to how good he was in Houston. It's been a while. We have a long sample, right? A very large sample of games of him playing, and it's not been good. And then you throw in Joe Flacco when the guy outproduces him. Jacoby Brissett they should have gone back to Jacoby. They couldn't because of the money. They should have gone back to Jacoby Brissett, and so they don't have that. I think they probably overpaid for Jerry Jeudy. And if they didn't, fans, I think, are a little bit too caught up in what he can provide. He's like a fine receiver. But I still think it's like Amari Cooper and, maybe Njoku has another great year. But that's it. That's like the offense. Nick Chubb is getting kind of up there, both in age and wear and tear. And while I love the idea of like a run-forward offense that has an elite running back that continues to produce, I am just skeptical of that continuing year after year after year, especially after the injuries that Chubb has suffered. And so, it's the quarterback is the primary issue here, but I do think that, hey, that offensive line hasn't performed like it did 2-3 years ago when it was, in consideration for one of the best. Chubb is kind of breaking down a little bit. They've got one, maybe two passing options. And then that defense was elite last year. It was remarkable. But it's hard to rely on defenses continuing to stay elite for a very long time.
I mean, that's what it's kind of like off topic, but like even like TJ Watt, it's crazy to think that like what he's aging. Like, I don't ever want to think that. Like, I just feel like TJ Watt is just going to be able to be TJ Watt. Getting 20-something sacks a year, but, inevitably Father Time gets us all. But, it's been really great talking to you. Just great insight. Just tell everyone where they can find you, your work, and what you got coming up next for the upcoming season.
Yeah, so you can find me over at my Substack, wideleft.football. Primarily a football Substack, but I do discuss, politics and culture there. So, be careful what articles you click on if you don't want to see that. But I just have a piece on Caitlin Clark is like the most recent one I've written. So if people want to hear my thoughts on that, for sure. My next piece is going to be one on why am I still skeptical of Jared Goff? Like statistically I shouldn't be. So why am I? So that's going to be an exploration of that. And then as we get closer to the season, I'm going to focus a little bit more on the NFC North, a little bit more on the Vikings. But whenever a question that's of national interest comes to mind, I'll talk about it. For example, and you're not going to like this, I've got a piece about why I like Myles Garrett more than TJ Watt. That's up there.
We'll have you on again.
We'll have to have you back on in the season.
Have a separate show.
Yeah, we'll do it, man.
That one.
You have another 55 minutes with us today. No, I'm kidding.
Oh man. No, but we had some of the PFF guys on, and they go, it went crazy just because how Steeler fans are some of the best fans. I'm being biased a little bit, but we're the best fans in the world, and it's no words. I was looking for an adjective to describe. I couldn't find it.
Passionate. How about that?
There you go.
Yeah.
So,
hey man.
But yeah, hey, it's been a pleasure having you. We'll definitely have to do it again, and we might have to do a whole episode on that topic, but we'll do it closer to the season. Keep
Sounds
up
like
the
fun,
great
man.
work. Love your work, and I know our viewers are really going to appreciate this episode. So thanks again for your time.
Awesome. Sounds good, man. You have a good one.
Take care. Yeah.
Hit us hard at the end there, man. We get it.
That was like a tease
on Tomlin. Good sound bites on the Browns, still being the Browns, and then bang, out of nowhere, hits us with a dagger to the chest. No, but just kidding. In all seriousness, he's not the only one who shares that sentiment. But good stuff, man. Another analyst who doesn't necessarily think Brandon Aiyuk is going to be moved. I'm leaning in that direction now as well. Recent shows, we've had other analysts who feel the same. Our last show was with a former general manager of the Dolphins as well as the Saints, Randy Mueller, who doesn't think Brandon Aiyuk is going to move either based on the fact that 49ers are in win-now mode. And so why are you moving a guy when you can potentially win a Super Bowl with one of your better players? So, at the end of the day, that doesn't bode well for the Steelers, and wide receiver too. Would like to see somebody added to that roster. But George Pickens will have to ascend into one of the elites, the Justin Jefferson, the CeeDee Lambs, potentially, if the Steelers aren't able to add to that room.
Yeah, and I know it's early. Well, football's less than 40-some days away, I think, now. And the whole thing about it is I just want to let it play out on the field this year. I think that the Steelers are going to be, same record as last year, but I think that this is the year where we're going to get a playoff run at least. Hopefully a little bit deeper, but I'm just going to let it play out on the field. My expectations are just hopefully to see that offense move the ball down the field and put some points on the board. Because, man, it feels like sometimes it felt like we was watching a high school team. How teams go out 42-0, they get to the red zone, can't get it in. So just want to see some long balls and, touchdowns. Wow.
Fair enough.
Is that too much to ask?
Long balls and touchdowns. Could be the episode show title.
There you go. Hey, it's been a pleasure. As always, we're going to keep pumping out the great guests. We have a Steeler coming on later this week. Make sure you subscribe, and we will see you soon. The Sick Podcast, Steeler Crazy, Mic'd Up Sports One, J York Football. Jimmy, let's do it.
And that's a wrap. Hope you don't miss us too much until next time. Follow the Sick Podcast Steelers Crazy on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, Google Play, and Apple Podcasts.